All right, guys, let's start with Old Yeller again here as I turn up the volume. We are in the middle of chapter 3, so we're going to try to finish that up. All right, here we go. Well, I couldn't lift my gun then, with her staring straight at me. She'd seen the motion and take a scare, and while Papa was a good enough shot to down a running deer, I'd never tried it and didn't much think that I could. I figured it was smarter to wait. Maybe she'd quit staring at me after a while and give me a chance to lift my gun. But I waited and waited, and she still kept looking at me, trying to figure it out. Finally, she started coming toward me. She'd take one dancing step and then another, and bob her head and flap her long ears about, then start moving toward me again. I didn't know what to do. It made me nervous the way she kept coming at me. Sooner or later, she was bound to make out who I was. Then she'd whirl and be gone before I could draw a bead on her. She kept doing me that way till finally my heart was flopping around inside my chest like a catfish in a wet sack. I could feel my muscles tightening up all over. I knew then I couldn't wait any longer. It was either shoot or bust wide open, so I whipped my gun up to my shoulder. Like I'd figured, she snorted and wheeled so fast that she was just a brown blur against my gun sights. I pressed the trigger, hoping my aim was good. After I fired, the black powder charge in my gun threw up such a thick fog of blue smoke that I couldn't see through it. I reloaded, then leaped to my feet and went running through the smoke. What I saw when I came to the clear again made my heart drop down into my shoes. There went the frightened, snorting cattle, stampeding through the trees with their tails in the air like it was heel fly time. And right beside them went my doe, running all humped up with her white pointed tail clamping tight to her rump, which meant that I'd hit her, but I hadn't made a killing shot. I didn't like that. I never minded killing for meat, like Papa had told me every creature has to kill to live. But to wound an animal was something else, especially one that was pretty and harmless as a deer. It made me sick to think of that doe escaping, maybe to hurt for days before she finally died. I swung my gun up, hoping yet to get in a killing shot, but I couldn't fire on account of the cattle. They were too close to the deer. I might kill one of them. So then suddenly the doe did a surprising thing. Way down in the flat there, nearly out of sight, she ran on into the trunk of a tree, like she was stone blind. I saw the flash of her light-colored belly as she went down, and I waited. She didn't get up. I tore out, running through the chin-tall grass as fast as I could. When finally I reached the place, all out of breath, I found her lying dead, with a bullet hole right through her middle, right where it had been shattered, right where it had to have shattered the heart. Suddenly, I wasn't sick anymore. I felt big and strong and sure of myself. I hadn't made a shot. I hadn't caused an animal a lot of suffering. All I'd done was get meat for the family, shooting it on the run just like Papa did. I'd rode toward the cabin, sitting behind the gutted doe that I'd tied across Jumper's back. I rode feeling proud of myself as a hunter and a provider for my family. Making a killing shot like that on a moving deer made me feel bigger and more important. Too big and important, I guess, to fuss like little Arliss did about that yeller dog. I still didn't think much of the idea of keeping him, but I guess that when you are nearly a man, you have to learn to put up with a lot of aggravation from little old bitty kids. Let Arliss keep the thieving rascal. I guessed I could provide enough meat for him too. That's how I was feeling when I crossed Birdsong Creek and rode up the spring under the trees below the house. Then suddenly I felt different. That's when I found little Arliss in the pool again, and in there with him was the big yeller dog. The dirty, stinking rascal romping around in our drinking water. Arliss, I yelled at little Arliss, you get that nasty old dog out of the water. They hadn't seen me ride up, and I guess it was my sudden yell that surprised them both so bad. Arliss went tearing out of the pool on one side and the dog on the other. Arliss was screaming his head off, and here came the big dog with his wet fur rising along the ridge of the backbone, baying me like I was a panther. I didn't give him a chance to get to me. I was too quick about jumping off the mule and grabbing up some rocks. I was lucky. The first rock I threw caught the big dog right between the eyes, and I was throwing hard. He went down, yelling and pitching and wallowing, and just as he came to his feet again, I caught him in the ribs with another one. That was too much for him. He turned tail then and took out for the house, squalling and bawling. But I wasn't the only good rock thrower in the family. Arliss was only 5 years old, but I'd spent a lot of time showing him how to throw a rock. Now I wished I hadn't, because about then a rock nearly tore my left ear off. I whirled around just barely in time to duck another that would have caught me square in the left eye. I yelled, Arliss, you quit that! But Arliss wasn't listening. He was too scared and too mad. He bent over to pick up a big rock enough to brain me with, if he'd been strong enough to throw it. Well, when you're 14 years old, you can't afford to mix in a rock fight with your 5-year-old brother. You can't do it, even when you're in the right. You just can't explain a thing like that to your folks. All they'll do is point out how much bigger you were and unfair it is to your little brother. All I could do was turn tail like the yeller dog and head for the house, yelling for Mama. And right after me came little Arliss, naked and running as fast as he could, doing his dead-level best to get close enough to hit me with the big rock he was packing. I outran him, of course, and then here came Mama, running so fast that her long skirts were flying and calling out, "What on earth, boys?" I hollered, "You better catch that Arliss," as I ran past her, and she did. But little Arliss was so mad that I thought for a second he was going to hit her with the rock before she could get it away from him. Well, it all wound up about like I figured. Mama switched little Arliss for playing in our drinking water. Then she blessed me out for good and proper for being so bossy with him. And the big yeller dog that had caused all the trouble got off scot-free. It didn't seem right and fair to me. How could I be the man of the family if nobody paid attention to what I thought or said? I went and led Jumper up to the house. I hung the doe in the live oak tree and grew beside the house and began skinning it and cutting up the meat. I thought of the fine shot I'd made and knew it was worth bragging about to Mama. But what was the use? She wouldn't pay me any mind, not until I did something she thought I shouldn't have done. Then she'd treat me like I wasn't any older than little Arliss. I sulked and felt sorry for myself all the time I worked with the meat. The more I thought about it, the madder I got at the big yeller dog. I hung the fresh cuts of the venison up in the dog run, right where old Yeller had stolen the hog meat the night he came. I did it for a couple of reasons. To begin with, that was the handiest and coolest place we had for hanging fresh meat. On top of that, I was looking for a good excuse to get rid of the dog. I figured if he stole more of our meat, Mama would have to see that he was too sorry and no account to keep. But old Yeller was too smart for that. He gnawed around some of the deer's leg bones and Mama threw away. But not once did he ever act like he could smell the meat we'd hung up. And that is the end of chapter 3. So we will start on chapter 4 tomorrow.